I don't care what the doctors say. I need to see him. Now. Donald Trump's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. The doctor hesitated, glancing nervously at the Secret Service agent standing by the door. "Mr. President, he's in critical condition," she said carefully. "He may not even recognize you." Trump adjusted the brim of his cap, his jaw tightening. "That doesn't matter. Just take me to him." With a nod, the doctor motioned for him to follow. The hallway was eerily quiet, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. The hospital at this hour felt like a different world, one where time moved slower and every breath was a battle. As they approached the private room at the end of the corridor, Trump took a deep breath. He wasn't here as a politician, a billionaire, or a former president. He was here as a man burdened by unfinished business. The door creaked open, revealing the frail figure lying in the hospital bed. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, but it was the face that struck Trump the hardest. For the first time in decades, he was face to face with the man who had once saved his life. As the tension in the room heightened, a sudden noise echoed through the hallway. Footsteps approached quickly, and the door burst open with force. A masked figure stood in the doorway, gun in hand, eyes scanning the room. Emily instinctively pulled Trump behind her, but the figure stepped forward, lifting the mask slowly, revealing none other than David Cole, alive, unscathed, and with a fire in his eyes. Trump's shock was evident. "David! You're alive!" David's expression was a mix of anger and resolve. "I had to disappear to make sure I wasn't framed for the things Langston and his team were planning. They were going to take me down with them. Turn me into a scapegoat." Emily's hands trembled as she backed away from the man she once thought was lost. "But why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you warn me?" David's eyes darkened. "I couldn't risk it. Langston had too many ties and there was no one I could trust. But I'm here now and I have a plan." Trump's mind raced. "What do you mean? What's going on, David? What's the next move?" David hesitated, glancing at Langston, whose face had turned pale. "There's more to this than you realize, Mr. President. Langston isn't the only one involved in this operation. Someone much bigger, someone more dangerous, is pulling the strings, and they've had their eyes on you for a long time." A chill ran down Trump's spine. "Who is it? Who's behind all this?" David's voice dropped to a whisper. "The one person you never would have suspected. The person closest to you, the one who has been in the shadows this whole time." At that moment, the lights flickered, and a sudden noise cut through the air. The door slammed shut behind them. To be continued. Trump stood frozen in the doorway. The man in the hospital bed was barely recognizable, his once strong frame now frail, his face lined with deep wrinkles of hardship. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor filled the room, punctuating the silence. "He saved my life," Trump murmured under his breath, his voice uncharacteristically soft. The doctor glanced at him. He never talked about it, not once, but I could tell it weighed on him. Trump stepped closer, his polished shoes nearly silent on the tile floor. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had spent years shaking hands with world leaders, striking deals worth billions, and standing at the center of global attention. But right now, in this dimly lit hospital room, all of that felt insignificant. "David," Trump finally said, his voice carrying a rare warmth. The old man's eyelids fluttered. A weak groan escaped his lips, his head barely turning toward the familiar voice. "Mr. President?" David Cole's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Trump exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Forget that title. It's just me. It's Trump." David's lips curved slightly, as if the mere sound of his name brought back a distant memory. "Took you long enough." Trump let out a dry chuckle, though his eyes held a deep sadness. "Yeah, I should have come sooner." David coughed, his chest rising and falling with effort. "They told me you forgot." The words stung. Trump shook his head, gripping the hospital bed's railing. "I never forgot. Not for a damn second." A silence settled between them, filled only by the soft hum of the machines. The doctor hesitated at the door. "I'll give you two a moment." She stepped out, leaving them alone. David's fingers twitched slightly, reaching toward Trump. With uncharacteristic gentleness, Trump placed his hand over the old man's. "You saved my life, David," Trump said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I never got the chance to thank you." David exhaled a shaky breath. I didn't do it for thanks." Trump nodded, his gaze darkening with resolve. "I know. But that's why it matters even more." He straightened, his posture regaining the authority he was known for. "Tell me what you need, David." "Anything. I'll make it happen." David smiled faintly, his eyelids growing heavy. I just wanted to know if it was worth it." Trump's jaw tightened. He leaned closer, speaking in a voice only David could hear. "It was." David let out a long, slow breath. His hand, still beneath Trump's, gave the weakest squeeze. And then the machines let out a long, unbroken tone. Trump's head snapped up as the monitor flatlined. "No," he whispered, his heart pounding. "David!" The door burst open, doctors rushing in. Trump stepped back, his face pale as they worked frantically. But deep down he already knew. David Cole, the man who had once saved Donald Trump's life, had taken his final breath, and Trump had been seconds too late. Trump stood motionless as the doctors worked, the steady wail of the flatline drilling into his skull. The world outside this hospital room had always seemed so fast. Deals closing, news cycles turning, his name flashing across headlines. But now, time felt slow. Too slow. The doctor placed two fingers on David's neck, searching for something that wasn't there. With a heavy sigh, she reached for the monitor and turned it off. The room fell into silence. "I'm sorry," she said softly, looking at Trump. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. His lips parted slightly, as if searching for something to say, but no words came. David Cole had been more than just a bodyguard. He had been a shield, a protector, a man who had once thrown himself in front of a bullet without hesitation. He had saved Trump's life decades ago, and Trump had never repaid that debt. The doctor touched Trump's arm gently. "Do you need a moment?" He nodded stiffly, watching as the medical team backed away. His gaze dropped to David's lifeless face. A man who had given everything and had died alone in a quiet hospital room, forgotten by the world. Number Trump clenched his fists, his expression hardening. David Cole would not be forgotten. With slow, deliberate steps, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number, his voice steady when he spoke. "Get me the press. And call my people. I want a full report on David Cole. Everything. His service record, his family, the works." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir?" Trump's jaw tightened. "We're giving him the honor he deserves. A man like this doesn't die in the dark." As he hung up, he looked down at David one last time. "You saved my life once," he murmured. "Now I make sure the world knows who you are." The weight of the promise settled over him, and Donald Trump never broke a promise. As Trump left the hospital room, his steps were slow but deliberate. The weight of David Cole's sacrifice pressed heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about repaying a debt. It was about justice, about setting things right. His security team was already outside, but for once Trump waved them off. He needed a moment, alone. He walked down the dimly lit hospital hallway, hands in his coat pockets, his mind racing. He had always known the world could be cruel, but how had a man like David Cole, someone who had given everything, been left to fade into obscurity. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was one of his advisors. "Sir, we pulled David's records. You're not going to believe this." "Try me." There was a pause. "After he saved you back in '87, he was forced into early retirement. They blacklisted him. Someone buried his career. He never got the recognition he deserved." Trump's jaw tightened. "Who did this?" "Still digging. But, sir, there's more. He had a family, a daughter, and from what we found, she doesn't even know the truth about what he did." Trump stopped walking. "Where is she?" "A small town in Virginia. We have an address." He exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about honoring a man's service anymore. It was about restoring a stolen legacy. "Tell the pilot to get Air Force One ready. We're going to Virginia." The engines of Air Force One hummed steadily as Trump stared out the window. His mind replayed the conversation with David. The pain in the old man's eyes, the years of silence, the injustice. "Mr. President, we'll be landing shortly," one of his aides informed him. Trump nodded but remained deep in thought. He had met world leaders, battled the media, and built an empire. But this felt different. This was personal. As the plane touched down in Virginia, a convoy of black SUVs was already waiting. The moment Trump stepped onto the tarmac, his security detail tightened around him. "We have the address, sir. It's a small house, about 20 minutes from here." The drive was quiet. Outside, the scenery shifted from bustling city streets to quieter suburban roads. Finally, they pulled up to a modest, well-kept home. The porch light flickered slightly, and wind chimes swayed in the evening breeze. Trump stepped out, adjusted his coat, and walked up to the door. He knocked firmly. A moment later, the door opened, revealing a woman in her mid-30s. She had David's eyes, sharp, observant, but carrying the same weariness her father had. "Can I help you?" she asked, puzzled. Trump took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about your father." Her expression shifted from confusion to guarded curiosity. "My father? What about him? Do you know what he did for this country? What he did for me?" She hesitated. "He was in the Secret Service, that's all I know. He never talked much about it." Trump's jaw tightened. "That's because someone made sure he wouldn't. Someone erased his legacy, and I'm here to fix that." Her breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your father is a hero, and it's time the world knew it." David Cole's daughter, Emily, stepped back, her fingers tightening around the doorframe. The disbelief in her eyes was evident. "A hero? My father?" Her voice was thick with skepticism. "Look, I don't know what you think he did, but he was just a retired agent, a man who worked hard and kept to himself." Trump exhaled slowly. "He saved my life, Emily, and no one ever gave him credit for it." Emily's brow furrowed. That doesn't make sense. If my dad saved a president, why would that be hidden?" Trump stepped closer, his expression softening. "Because someone wanted to bury the truth, to erase him, and for 40 years they succeeded." Emily shook her head, struggling to process the words. "I don't know what you expect me to do with this information." "Come with me," Trump said, his voice steady. "Let me show you what they took from him." She hesitated. For years, she had felt the weight of her father's unspoken burdens, the way he carried an invisible grief. And now, a man she had only ever seen on television was standing at her doorstep, asking her to uncover a truth she never knew existed. Finally, she took a deep breath. "Okay." Trump nodded, stepping aside as she grabbed her coat. "Let's go find the truth." As Trump's motorcade pulled up to a private government archive, Emily's heart pounded. She had never been involved in anything like this before, and the sheer weight of the moment made her uneasy. The building was nondescript, buried deep within the city's bureaucratic maze. But inside, it housed decades of classified documents, including those tied to her father's past. A man in a sharp suit greeted them. He looked at Trump with a mixture of respect and hesitation. "Mr. President, are you sure about this? These files were meant to be sealed indefinitely." Trump didn't flinch. "We're opening them." The man sighed, then led them down a long hallway to a secured room. With a series of security clearances and biometric scans, a large steel door hissed open. Inside, rows of locked cabinets stretched toward the ceiling. The agent pulled out a file marked Cole, David, classified. Emily's hands trembled as she took the file. She flipped it open and gasped. There were surveillance photos, detailed reports, and a transcript of an operation labeled Project Silent Watch, an assassination attempt on Trump during his first campaign. She skimmed through the pages, her father's name appearing repeatedly. "Oh my God," Emily whispered. One paragraph in particular stood out. Agent Cole neutralized the threat but was deemed a liability due to his knowledge of high-level corruption. Orders were given to erase his service record, ensuring he would never receive public recognition. Emily clenched her jaw. They erased him to protect themselves. Trump's expression darkened. "And now we bring it all to light." Emily clenched the file in her hands as she and Trump exited the archive. The weight of her father's erased legacy burned inside her, but Trump's expression was unreadable, his mind already calculating the next move. Back inside the armored SUV, Trump dialed a secure line. Within seconds, a gruff voice answered. "Mr. President, get me Director Langston. Now." There was a pause before the voice responded. "Sir, Director Langston is in a closed session." Trump's jaw tightened. "Tell him I'm outside his office and he has exactly 2 minutes before I walk in there myself." Emily swallowed hard. "Who is Director Langston?" "The man who helped bury your father's name," Trump said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The SUV pulled up to the FBI's headquarters, and before the engine had even cut off, Trump stepped out. Secret Service agents flanked him as they marched inside. In the executive wing, a visibly uncomfortable Director Langston stood waiting. He was an older man, well-groomed but visibly unsettled. "Mr. President, this is highly irregular." Trump didn't slow down. "You and I both know what's irregular, Langston. Tell me why David Cole's name was erased from history. Tell me why a man who saved my life was cast aside like he never existed." Langston's throat bobbed as he exhaled. "It was out of my hands." Emily stepped forward, her voice filled with controlled rage. "My father gave everything for this country, and you let them erase him. You let them destroy his life." Langston sighed and looked around nervously before lowering his voice. "There are things, Mr. President, that even you don't have full clearance to see." Trump's eyes narrowed. "Then I suggest you start talking, Langston." "Before I tear this whole place apart." Langston hesitated before finally relenting. "Come with me." He led them down a restricted hallway, scanning his ID at multiple checkpoints until they reached a hidden records room. Inside, he pulled out a classified dossier marked Operation Ghost. Langston placed the file on the table, staring at Trump. "David Cole didn't just save you, sir. He uncovered something. Something that people in very high places didn't want exposed." Trump glanced at Emily before opening the file. His eyes flickered with shock as he read the first few lines. Emily leaned in and gasped. What they saw inside changed everything. Trump's fingers trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages of the Operation Ghost dossier. Every word, every image felt like a bombshell, each piece of information connecting the dots of a hidden conspiracy. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she too absorbed the gravity of what they were reading. The file detailed a covert operation that David Cole had uncovered, a massive political scandal that involved some of the highest-ranking officials in government. This operation, hidden under layers of secrecy, was linked to several unlawful acts, including embezzlement, corruption, and even high-level cover-ups of military operations that had gone disastrously wrong. But that wasn't the worst part. In the final redacted section of the file was a list of names that sent a chill down Trump's spine. At the top of the list, written in bold letters, was Langston Harold J. Trump slammed the file shut with a look of fury. "You, Langston! You were part of this the entire time!" Langston, visibly sweating now, shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Mr. President. David Cole wasn't supposed to find out." Emily's voice shook as she spoke. "My father. He knew about this. He knew and still protected you." Langston nodded, guilt in his eyes. He was going to expose it all, but when he uncovered the truth, they threatened him. They told him that if he went public, not only would his life be destroyed, but his family's as well. That was when he made the decision to disappear. He erased his identity to keep you safe, to protect everyone involved. Trump's mind raced as the weight of the revelation settled in. His hands tightened into fists. This wasn't just about David Cole anymore. This was about exposing a dangerous system, and they were standing at the center of it all. "You knew about all this, Langston, and you did nothing to stop it. You covered it up." Trump's voice was ice cold. Langston opened his mouth as if searching for the right words, but they didn't come. Emily's eyes burned with determination. "You erased my father's life, Langston. You buried him like he was nothing." Trump turned to her, his tone suddenly softening. "We'll fix this, Emily. We'll make it right."